Welcome to New York City. The year is 1920. You have just arrived in the largest, loudest, and most ambitious city on Earth. Look around. This is a place where 5,600,000 people wake up every single day, believing that anything is possible. The skyline here is like nothing the world has ever seen. Towers of steel and stone rising so high, they seem to scratch the clouds themselves. And right now, at this very moment, something strange is happening. As of January 17, 1920, it is now illegal to buy, sell, or drink alcohol anywhere in the United States of America. The 18th Amendment has taken effect. Prohibition has begun. The government believes this will create a cleaner, more moral society. What it will actually create is an underground empire of speakeasies, bootleggers, and organized crime that will define this entire decade. But nobody knows that yet. Right now, the champagne glasses are being hidden, the saloons are closing their doors, and New Yorkers are asking themselves one simple question: where do we get a drink? The island of Manhattan stretches before us like a canyon of ambition. At its southern tip, the financial district hums with the machinery of capitalism. The New York Stock Exchange, the great banks, the offices where fortunes are made and lost before lunchtime. The Woolworth Building, completed just 7 years ago, still holds the title of the tallest building in the world at 792 feet. They call it the Cathedral of Commerce, and from its Gothic tower you can see all 5 boroughs spread out beneath you like a living map. But Manhattan is not just about the wealthy and the powerful. Walk a few blocks east, and you will find the Lower East Side, where immigrants from Italy, Poland, Russia, and a dozen other countries live packed into tenement buildings, 6 or 7 people to a single room, sharing bathrooms with entire floors of strangers. The smell of garlic and fresh bread mixes with the smoke from coal stoves. Children play in the streets while their parents work 14-hour days in garment factories. This is the other New York, the city of the hustle, the city of survival, the city that builds the buildings and sews the clothes and cooks the food that keeps the wealthy fed and comfortable. The man running this city is Mayor John Francis Hylan, a Democrat from Brooklyn who came to power promising to fight for the working class against the big corporations and the subway barons. He is loud, he is stubborn, and he is deeply suspicious of anyone with too much money. In Washington, President Woodrow Wilson occupies the White House, though his health is failing after the stroke he suffered last year. The country has just emerged from the Great War, and there is a sense of restlessness in the air, a feeling that the old rules no longer apply. The 19th Amendment, granting women the right to vote, will be ratified this August, changing American politics forever. And here in New York, the tension between those who support prohibition and those who see it as an outrageous invasion of personal freedom is already simmering. The city's saloons, more than 15,000 of them, have technically closed, but everyone knows that behind locked doors, in basements and back rooms across the 5 boroughs, the drinks are still flowing. The law has changed. New York has not, and so the city adapts, as it always does. By 1922, prohibition is not a barrier. It is an opportunity. Wall Street has become the undisputed financial capital of the world, surpassing even London, and the money flowing through Lower Manhattan is almost beyond comprehension. The United States dollar is backed by gold, and American banks hold more of it than any nation on earth. If you want to understand what life costs in this roaring metropolis, consider this. A decent apartment in Manhattan runs about $60 a month. A small fortune for a factory worker earning perhaps $25 a week, but pocket change for the stockbrokers and bankers who are making thousands in a single afternoon. A brand new Ford Model T, the car that is changing American life, costs around $300. A fine dinner at Delmonico's, the legendary restaurant where the elite gather to see and be seen, might set you back $5 or $6, more than what a garment worker earns in an entire day. The gap between rich and poor is staggering, and yet there is a feeling in the air that anyone can make it, that the elevator to the top floor is open to all who dare to step inside. The great mansions of Fifth Avenue, owned by families named Rockefeller, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, and Morgan, stand as monuments to what American capitalism can build. These are not merely homes, they are palaces, filled with art looted from European estates, furniture crafted by the finest hands in France, and ballrooms where a single party might cost more than most Americans earn in a lifetime. But the real action is not happening in those gilded parlors. It is happening behind unmarked doors, down narrow staircases, in the basements and back rooms where the speakeasies have taken root. These secret bars are everywhere now, hidden behind barbershops, laundries, and funeral homes, protected by passwords and passwords alone. The word speakeasy itself comes from the need to speak quietly, to keep your voice down so the cops outside do not hear the laughter and the clinking glasses within. By some estimates, there are more than 30,000 speakeasies operating in New York City by 1923. Twice as many drinking establishments as there were legal saloons before Prohibition began. The bootleggers who supply them with whiskey, gin, and rum are becoming fabulously wealthy. Men like Arnold Rothstein, the so-called Big Bankroll, run operations that stretch from the Canadian border to the ships waiting offshore in what they call Rum Row. Rothstein is a gambler, a fixer, a man who supposedly arranged the infamous Black Sox scandal of 1919. He wears fine suits, dines at the best restaurants, and operates in plain sight while the police look the other way, their pockets heavy with his money. This is the contradiction of Prohibition New York. The law exists, but it is enforced only against those too poor or too unlucky to pay for protection. And while the bootleggers count their cash downtown, something extraordinary is happening uptown. In Harlem, north of Central Park, a cultural revolution is underway that will change America forever. The neighborhood has transformed in just a few years from a white middle-class enclave into the vibrant heart of Black American life, as hundreds of thousands of African Americans migrate north from the Jim Crow South, seeking freedom, opportunity, and dignity. What they are building here is nothing less than a renaissance, a flowering of art, literature, music, and ideas that will reshape the very soul of the nation. The Cotton Club opens its doors on Lenox Avenue in 1923, and though its policies are shamefully segregated, black performers on stage, white audiences in the seats, the music that pours out of that room is revolutionary. A young band leader named Duke Ellington is just getting started, crafting a sophisticated jazz sound that blends African rhythms with European harmonies. Louis Armstrong has arrived from New Orleans, his trumpet playing unlike anything anyone has ever heard. Poets like Langston Hughes are putting into words the joy and pain and beauty of the black experience in America. This is the Harlem Renaissance, and its echoes will still be heard a century from now. The music from Harlem has spread across the city now, and by 1925, jazz is not just a sound, it is a way of life. To understand what it means to be an ordinary New Yorker in the middle of this roaring decade, you must first understand the rhythm of daily existence. For the working class, the day begins early, often before dawn, with the shriek of an alarm clock or the distant rumble of the elevated trains that snake through Manhattan and Brooklyn like iron serpents. Factory workers, shop clerks, secretaries, and laborers pour out of their tenements and boarding houses, grabbing a quick breakfast of coffee and bread before joining the human river flowing toward the subways. They work long hours, 10, 11, sometimes 12 hours a day, in garment factories, meatpacking plants, construction sites, and the countless small businesses that keep the city running. But for the wealthy, for the bankers and heiresses and idle sons of great fortunes, the day begins much later, often after noon, following parties that stretched until 3 or 4 in the morning. This is the age of the flapper, the young woman who has thrown off the corsets and constraints of her mother's generation, who cuts her hair short in a bold bob, paints her lips red, raises her hemlines above the knee, and dances the Charleston until her feet ache. The men wear sharp suits with wide lapels, slick their hair back with pomade, and carry silver flasks filled with bootleg gin, and everyone, rich and poor alike, gathers around a miraculous new invention that is transforming American life: the radio. By 1926, there are more than 5 million radio sets in American homes, and families huddle together in their living rooms to hear music, news, comedy shows, and the play-by-play of baseball games featuring the mighty Babe Ruth, the Sultan of SWAT himself, whose home runs for the New York Yankees have made him the most famous athlete in the country. But there is something else happening in America, something that will define this era perhaps more than jazz or flappers or even prohibition. Americans have discovered credit. The phrase "buy now, pay later" has become the unofficial motto of the decade, and it has unleashed a tidal wave of consumption unlike anything the world has ever seen. Before the 20s, most Americans paid cash for what they bought, and if they could not afford something, they simply did without. Now, installment plans allow ordinary families to purchase automobiles, refrigerators, washing machines, vacuum cleaners, and radios with just a small down payment and monthly installments stretched over a year or two. The automobile, once a luxury for the rich, has become a necessity for the middle class. By 1926, there are more than 20 million cars on American roads, and Henry Ford's assembly lines in Detroit cannot produce them fast enough. The advertising industry has exploded to meet this new consumer demand, and the agencies of Madison Avenue have become masters of persuasion, convincing Americans that happiness can be purchased, that the good life is just one more product away. Billboards line the highways, magazines overflow with glossy advertisements, and the radio crackles with jingles designed to burrow into your brain and never leave. Yet not everyone is invited to this party. The great wave of immigration that built New York, the Irish, the Italians, the Jews, the Poles, the Chinese, has been dramatically curtailed by the Immigration Act of 1924, which imposes strict quotas designed to keep out Southern and Eastern Europeans and ban Asians almost entirely. The law reflects a darker current running beneath the glittering surface of the 20s, a fear of foreigners, a suspicion of difference, a nativist impulse that has found its most violent expression in the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan, which by the mid-20s claims more than 4 million members nationwide. The Klan's power is mostly in the South and Midwest. In New York City, their rallies are met with protests and ridicule, but their presence is a reminder that the tolerance and diversity of this great metropolis is not shared by much of the country. Here in New York, Italians and Jews and Irish and blacks live side by side, not always peacefully, but together, building something new. Outside the city limits, in the small towns and rural communities of America, That mixing is viewed with suspicion and sometimes hatred. New York is a bubble, a glittering exception, a city that has always been slightly out of step with the rest of the nation. And in 1926, that bubble feels invincible. And then comes 1927, the year that will cement New York's belief in its own invincibility. On the morning of May 20th, a 25-year-old airmail pilot from Minnesota climbs into the cockpit of a single-engine monoplane at Roosevelt Field on Long Island. His name is Charles Augustus Lindbergh, and he is about to attempt something that has never been done. A solo non-stop flight across the Atlantic Ocean from New York to Paris. A distance of more than 3,600 miles over nothing but cold, dark water. Other pilots have tried and failed, some of them perishing in the attempt, and the newspapers have called this young man foolish, reckless, even suicidal. But 33.5 hours later, Lindbergh touches down at Le Bourget Field outside Paris, and the world goes absolutely mad. When he returns to New York a few weeks later, the city throws him a ticker tape parade, unlike anything ever seen before. 4 million people pack the streets of Manhattan, showering his motorcade with 1,800 tons of confetti and torn paper, cheering until their voices give out. Lucky Lindy has become the most famous man on Earth, a symbol of American courage, ingenuity, and daring. And if one man in a tiny plane can conquer the Atlantic, what else might be possible? That same summer, a man named George Herman Ruth, better known as Babe Ruth, stands at home plate in Yankee Stadium and does something no baseball player has ever done. He hits 60 home runs in a single season, a record that will stand for 34 years. New York has produced 2 titans, 2 heroes, 2 icons who seem to embody everything this decade believes about itself. The city's ambitions are now reaching literally toward the heavens. A great race has begun among New York's architects and developers to construct the tallest building in the world, and the competition is fierce, secretive, and breathtakingly expensive. In 1928, construction begins on the Chrysler Building at the corner of Lexington Avenue and 42nd Street, a tower designed by architect William Van Allen that will rise 77 stories into the sky, crowned by a distinctive stainless steel spire that glitters in the sun like a needle of pure ambition. But even as the Chrysler Building climbs floor by floor, rumors swirl that other developers are planning something even taller. The architects guard their blueprints like military secrets, each one determined to claim the title of the world's tallest. Every month, it seems, the New York skyline grows more vertical, more audacious, more unlike any city that has ever existed. Workers called sky boys walk along steel beams hundreds of feet above the street, riveting and welding with a casual bravery that astonishes everyone who watches from below. This is a city that refuses to accept limits, that sees the sky not as a boundary, but as an invitation. And nowhere is that limitless optimism more concentrated than on Wall Street. By 1928, the stock market has become a national obsession, a casino where everyone believes they can win. The numbers are staggering. In just 3 years, the Dow Jones Industrial Average has more than doubled, and stocks that sold for $10 in 1925 are now worth 50 or 60 or even 100. Ordinary Americans who have never owned a share of stock in their lives are now borrowing money to buy into the market, convinced that prices will keep rising forever. Taxi drivers offer tips to their passengers. Shoeshine boys discuss which stocks to buy. Housewives gather around the radio to hear the latest market reports. The great financiers of Wall Street, men who should know better, assure the public that this boom is different, that the old rules of economics no longer apply, that America has entered a new era of permanent prosperity. A few voices urge caution, warning that stock prices have become dangerously disconnected from the actual value of the companies they represent. But those voices are drowned out by the roar of easy money, and anyone who suggests that the party might end is dismissed as a pessimist, a fool, or simply someone who does not understand the magnificent new America that is being born. The summer of 1929 is golden, warm, and impossibly optimistic. New Yorkers stroll through Central Park in their finest clothes, dine at rooftop restaurants with views of a skyline that seems to grow taller by the week, and talk endlessly about the fortunes they are making, or are about to make, in the stock market. The Dow Jones Industrial Average reaches an all-time high of 381 points on September 3rd, a number that seems to prove once and for all that the doubters were wrong, that American prosperity has no ceiling, that the good times will simply roll on forever. Couples plan weddings, families buy homes on credit, investors borrow against stocks they already own to buy even more stocks. Nobody wants to miss out. Nobody wants to be left behind. But there are cracks forming beneath the surface that only a few can see. Industrial production has been slowing for months, construction is declining, consumer spending is beginning to falter, and much of the wealth in the stock market exists only on paper, propped up by borrowed money and blind faith. The great machine of American capitalism is running hot, too hot, and somewhere deep in its gears, something is about to break. On October 24th, 1929, a day that will be remembered as Black Thursday, panic suddenly grips Wall Street. Stock prices begin to fall, then plunge, and desperate traders flood the exchange, trying to sell before they lose everything. The great bankers meet in secret and inject millions of dollars into the market, temporarily stopping the bleeding. But it is only a pause. 5 days later, on October 29th, Black Tuesday, the dam breaks completely. 16 million shares are sold in a single day of chaos and despair, wiping out billions of dollars in wealth. Fortunes accumulated over a lifetime vanish in hours. The Roaring Twenties, that magnificent, reckless, unforgettable decade, has come to a sudden and devastating end. What follows will be the Great Depression, the darkest economic chapter in American history, a decade of breadlines and unemployment and suffering that will reshape the nation. But that is a story for another time. What matters now is what the 1920s left behind, because the legacy of this extraordinary decade is still visible, still audible, still alive in the streets of New York and in the culture of America. The jazz that poured out of Harlem did not die when the stock market crashed. It spread across the world and became one of America's greatest gifts to human civilization, the foundation for rhythm and blues, rock and roll, hip-hop, and virtually every form of popular music that followed. The skyscrapers that ambitious developers raced to build still define the Manhattan skyline. The Chrysler Building was completed in 1930, the Empire State Building in 1931, monuments to an age of audacity that refused to think small. The speakeasies may have closed when Prohibition finally ended in 1933, but they gave birth to the cocktail culture and the nightlife scene that still makes New York one of the most exciting cities on earth after dark. The flappers who scandalized their parents became the grandmothers who told their granddaughters that women could be bold, independent, and free. The writers and artists of the Harlem Renaissance planted seeds that would flower into the civil rights movement and the ongoing struggle for equality and justice. And so we leave New York as we found it, loud, ambitious, contradictory, and utterly alive. The people who walked these streets in 1920 did not know that they were living through one of the most remarkable decades in human history. They did not know that the music they danced to, the buildings they watched rise, the dreams they chased would still echo 100 years later. They were simply living their lives, trying to get ahead, falling in love, making mistakes, and believing, as New Yorkers always have, that tomorrow would be better than today. Some of them lost everything when the crash came. Some of them survived and rebuilt, but all of them were part of something larger than themselves. A moment when a city and a nation decided to reach for the sky and, for one shining decade, actually touched it. If you walk through Manhattan today, past the Art Deco lobbies and the jazz clubs and the crowded streets where dreams are still bought and sold, you are walking through the legacy of the Roaring Twenties. The party ended. The spirit never did.